Good morning and welcome to Crack the Mic podcast with Agent of Change DeCorey Davis. And this week's segment is titled Policing in Urban America. And to help me further this discussion, I have a distinguished panel that includes Chief of Police Scott Israel, who has over 40 years in law enforcement and is currently the Chief of Police for Opa-locka Police Department in Opa-locka City, Florida. Reverend Andre Green, a steward at Mount Hermon AME Church in Miami Gardens, Florida, and he's also a social activist who sits on the board for PACT, a social justice organization that has been fighting for justice in the Miami-Dade County for over 30 years. Isaiah Wallace, owner of Crown Guard Security Company, motivational speaker, and is executive producer to the podcast. And last but certainly not least, Reverend Keon Payton, senior pastor, Princeton Theological Seminary graduate, and director of community outreach for Realm Films International. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
With the crime rate on a steady increase in the U.S., more specifically, the murder rate rose 30% between 2019 and 2020, the largest single increase in more than a century, according to data published by the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC. Now, to be clear, the findings are aligned with a separate tabulation of the nation's murder rate published by the FBI, because the CDC tracks murders by analyzing information contained in death certificates. Meanwhile, the FBI collects the information from thousands of law enforcement agencies across the country. Nonetheless, despite their different methodologies, both sources point to a rise in the US murder rate during the pandemic year of 2020. Suffice it to say, firearms were involved in 77% of those murders, according to the FBI. Now, in an article, I just want to say this here, published by the Washington Post in 2015, Maurice Jackson, then a history professor at Georgetown University, wrote a piece titled, "Why Police Can't Fix Urban America's Violent Crime Problems." He suggested the following. After citing sentiments expressed by the DC mayor at the time, Muriel Bowser, insisted that the key to preventing the kinds of riots that had raged in Baltimore and Ferguson, Missouri, is to listen to young people's grievances and provide them with better opportunities. Now, without further ado, let's just delve in this conversation, if we may. And I'd like to pose this question to the panel. What can lawmakers and law enforcement do to minimize the crime rate in the United States?
If there's no order, I'll take the first stab at it. This is Reverend Payton from New Bethel Missionary Baptist Church, where I've served as pastor for the last 15 years. But I've been in ministry now for 30 years. And currently I'm working on my doctorate in strategic leadership to treat and prevent adverse childhood experiences. And I give that background because currently I'm in process of developing an Institute of Trauma and Economic Justice. And we know now with much research and data that untreated traumas or adverse childhood experiences are the root causes of many of the societal ills that are affecting many of our communities. And notwithstanding the fact that everyone has been impacted by traumas, a significant number of young people are experiencing mental illness that has been exacerbated, not just from their traumas, but coming out of this pandemic. And with the escalating violence that we're seeing in streets across America, I believe that one of the things that law enforcement can begin to do is to think about criminal justice from the standpoint of being more trauma informed, learning more about their communities and the traumas that are impacting young people in the community. You referenced listening to our young people. We need to make certain that we are providing resources to ensure that we are adequately treating mental illness and providing behavioral health support services in many of our communities.
Absolutely. I welcome that sentiment. You want to go ahead, Chief Scott Israel, and share your sentiment on the question, sir?
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more with the pastor. He's spot on. When in my years, 40 years in law enforcement, speaking predominantly about 6+ years as sheriff up in Broward County, we did things like a civil citation program where I made it mandatory. I was the first sheriff in the state and the first police leader in Broward County to take the ability for our deputies to arrest a juvenile who committed a misdemeanor. Instead, we put them into a civil citation program where they would get help in four areas: alcohol, narcotics, anger management, and mental health issues. And a lot of critics said that it was impossible for me to take a soft approach on juvenile crimes and get involved in diversion and push juveniles towards diversion programs and reduce crime at the same time, and how wrong they were. And the proof was in the pudding. In Broward County at that time, 64% was the recidivism rate in the county.
Wow.
And most of the adults who were coming back for the same crimes. So if you think about it, sir, the recidivism rate amongst children should be about the same 64%. Yet when the juveniles we put into the civil citation program, the recidivistic rate was 4%. And a lot of people, I'm not a behavioral scientist, but people would keep asking me, how did it get so low? How did it get so low? I'd like to think that for the first time in some children's life, they were able to, kids spell, we spell love, people like you and I, we spell love Love. Young children spell love Time. So we now had professionals, mentors, spending time with kids, and it worked. And I think what law enforcement could do is to adopt what the pastor said, coupled with the fact that we must create, you said, what can law enforcement do? Well, law enforcement can't do anything by themselves. All the stakeholders need to come together. It needs to be one team, one fight. All stakeholders need to be pulling in the same direction. We need to, in my opinion, we need to take a hard line on people who commit violent crimes. We need to take a diversionary approach on people with drug addictions, with mental health issues, with alcohol. And I think that's a start. And I think that's where we have to begin.
I echo that sentiment, Chief Israel. You want to go ahead and share your thoughts, Isaiah?
Yes. I agree with everything that the previous speakers were hitting on. Those are excellent points. To me, it is very much that we have to attack recidivism as far as people continually to commit the same actions and the same forces. I feel like law enforcement and lawmakers could target people as far as education. I feel like that is a very big problem, because in order to truly be rehabilitated, in my opinion, you have to have some sort of goal or outlook. You know what I mean? It's like if you're trying to heal from a serious disease, as far as being a criminal or having a career in crime, and you need to be away from other criminals. You need to try to make new patterns. It's a whole way of change. And I think education is a big component to that. And right now in the prison system, as far as people wanting to change, everything is saying that the door is closed on them. They can't get certain, financial aids or Pell Grants. If you wanted to change and you have a felony or a serious crime, you know what I mean? Your life is pretty much in shambles until you work 30 years doing the same thing, or you find some way to renew your name. It's not very easy.
Absolutely. We accept that sentiment, Mr. Wallace. You want to go ahead and share your thoughts, Reverend Green?
Yes, I do. Good morning, gentlemen. One of the things that I would like to say, I agree with a lot of the statements that have been made, but what can lawmakers and law enforcement do to minimize crime rate in the U.S.? One of the things that I think that is actually needed with the lawmakers is basically, the laws that are in place themselves, the systemicness nature of the laws. One of the things that I realized that would reduce a lot of crime that you don't see in a lot of affluent neighborhoods is generational wealth. There was a lot of, in the turn of the century, a lot of communities, Black communities, communities of color, that were businesses, entrepreneurs. Just think if that wealth, like most of the other counterparts, was passed down, those businesses, those hotels, where today that wealth will be in the community and it wouldn't be so much poverty, it'd be a different mindset. And one of the things that Sheriff Israel stated about the citation, the organization that I'm with, which is called PAC, we're one of the organizations that's directly responsible for pushing the elected officials, like, Sheriff Israel and them to adopt a citation instead of arresting these kids for minor offenses, like they get fist fights in the courtyard like we used to do, and they call assault charges when they're 18, and then they can't get jobs, and the only thing they do is they go into crime. Those are things that will curb crime, along with the childhood trauma, as the pastor was talking about. All those things are relevant, but it stems a long time ago that's been developed and cultivated over years because of economics, because of the lack of generational wealth that passed through people of color. And that's part of the crime problem, along with some of the other things that were mentioned.
I welcome that sentiment, Reverend Green. And I'd like to just add, in addition to treating trauma and also education, or the lack thereof, programs available are readily accessible to people of color. And in addition to wealth being transferred from generation to generation, I'd just like to add this here, because there is a correlation between poverty and crime. If you do not have folk being accessible or having access to economic empowerment, then they will engage in felonious capers, and that is scientifically proven. I digress. Isaiah, you have the next question, sir.
Do you believe that there should be a ban on assault weapons? If so, why or why not?
And Chief, if possible, can you lead the narrative on that one, sir?
Absolutely. First off, I believe, before we even get into assault weapons, I believe strongly that I believe in the Second Amendment. I understand the Second Amendment, but I believe strongly that 3 types of Americans should never have any type of firearm, assault weapon, or handgun in their possession ever. First off, if an individual is placed by Homeland Security on a no-fly list, there's no reason for this person to ever have a gun of any kind for the rest of their lives. Number 2, if a person has committed a felony, and I am a big supporter, and anyone who knows me knows I'm a big supporter of rights restoration. I believe that's the right thing to do and the way to go with this country. However, if a person is convicted of a felony, and in the felony, they use the handgun to shoot, kill, destroy another family's life, I believe that person should never be allowed to have a gun of any kind for the rest of his or her life. And number 3, I believe that, I'm glad we started this off by speaking about mental illness. we don't do enough. We don't spend enough money in this country to assist people, especially young children who suffer from mental illness. But I'll say this relating to mental illness and guns. If one of us, God forbid, hurt our knee tonight and we needed surgery on our ACL, and the doctor came and said the surgery was successful, what that means is we are on the road to healing. We are not ready to play basketball, baseball tomorrow. We still have 10 to 12 months of rehabilitation and recovery. If a person is being treated for a mental illness, like everybody, I pray, hope and pray that they get better. But while a person is being treated for mental illness, they should not have in their arsenal a handgun or a rifle of any kind. We don't need victims because a person is suffering from mental illness. So those are three areas that I think are very important to me and law enforcement, and I've always stood by that. As far as assault weapons don't belong in urban America. There's no reason to have them. They're created, they're military weapons. I believe, people have the right to have handguns and rifles. I understand the Second Amendment, but having an assault weapon in an urban society, there's no purpose. It serves no purpose other than to bring great carnage and to be involved in massive killings. And that's my thoughts in that area.
Okay, and I welcome that sentiment. And I'd like to just say this here, because a lot of folks may wonder and say, hey, DeCorey, you are a Republican, and Republicans are for assault rifles. Be as it may, if there is a question about my loyalty, it can be said that I am dead center to the right. I digress. Go ahead, Mr. Green. You want to share your thoughts on that, sir?
Yeah, I agree, with Sheriff Israel on some of the statements that he made. I don't believe that assault weapons, I'm a hunter myself, and, I have a couple weapons, and, there's an etiquette that goes along with everything. There's a respect, of what you're doing. And I think assault weapons are designed for what they're designed for killing. And, that's for war. That's nothing. I can see someone of age. I understand raising the age to 21 or whatever. I understand even having the background checks and red flags and all those different things. That's only natural. It's only common sense. I'm a gun owner, there's a certain responsibility that goes along with it. It's for protection and those type of things. But I also enjoy the sport of using a gun. And a lot of people feel the same way that I do. And the Second Amendment basically says that it's the right of a state, a militia in a state, to form a militia of a free state to defend themselves and to bear arms. That's all it says. It doesn't say anything that what we're talking about and all this stuff that's going on. Those are things that have been added in, but that's all it says. And right now, and the reason why they got a militia, that was to aid the army back then when they were separating themselves from England. And now we don't need a militia. Militias are a lot of these type of groups that do a lot of violence and things like that. Those are the militias that we have now. So the Second Amendment, as it's stated in the Bill of Rights, is not what we're practicing today. It is not even the conversation that we're having. And assault weapons and things like that has nothing to do with the Second Amendment. Those are common sense things that we as people, as a nation of people, need to discuss among ourselves. And just,
Absolutely.
It's not even all this political stuff that's going on. But anyway, thank you.
Go ahead. No, we accept that, Reverend Green. You want to go ahead and share your thoughts, Reverend Payton?
Yes, thank you. And I'm certainly in full agreement with Sheriff Israel and Reverend Green with respect to common sense legislation. One of the things, though, if I were to play devil's advocate, that many of our American brothers and sisters believe, and it's true, the statement that guns don't kill people, people do. People pull the trigger. And going back to what Sheriff Israel said, I do think that we have to do a much better job understanding the mental state of individuals who would want to go purchase assault weapons. and what their intent is. A lot of the killings, the more recent killings that we've been experiencing, and I'm here in Oakland County, Michigan, where Sheriff Michael Bouchard is a close friend, and he and I are working together, as Sheriff Israel mentioned, in developing a coalition of transdisciplinary partners to really address this issue. And we recently had a mass shooting in Oxford, Michigan, which is in Oakland County. And we know that the individual who did the shooting, we had indicators prior to that shooting that he was dealing with mental challenges. And the stories, can go on and on about us really not fully understanding the mental state. You think about the shooting recently in Texas, the young man who shot his grandmother in the face first with the intent to kill her before he proceeded to an elementary school. So the Institute of Trauma and Economic Justice, we're very committed to developing screening assessments that can help to determine exactly how traumas are impacting the mental state and wellness of men, women, and children. In addition to a number of external assessments, some people are very familiar with the ACEs assessment, and there are a number of assessments that can determine the trajectory of one's self-destructive behaviors. But in addition, not just on the layperson side, but we also know coming out of the Black Lives Matter movement that a significant number of African Americans have died at the hands of law enforcement. And with respect to just understanding the mental state of officers, having received certification from Howard University in theology and racialized policing, and more recently a 10-week training that was provided by the Oakland County Sheriff's Department, I've come to realize that a significant number of police officers are overwhelmed, overstressed, working a significant number of overtime hours. And these are human beings as well, that have normal lives, that have dysfunctional marriages, that have rebellious children, people that have stress that impact their lives. And one of the things that the Institute will be providing are not only external assessments, but we know now through science and medicine that we can measure individuals' DNA to determine exactly how chronic stress is impacting them. Can you imagine how transformative that might be, Sheriff Israel, if your police officers had the opportunity of doing a rapid test when they show up to work to determine how high their stress levels are? The terminology is cortisol levels. So if we know that stress levels are high when officers are showing up to duty, we know that they will have a better fight or flight response when their stressors are lessened. And so I think as we begin to really uncover the reality of how traumas and stress is impacting the mental wellness of each of us, I think that will go a long way in helping us to solve the human problem of violence, where people are motivated to use guns and weapons to take the lives of other human beings.
Yeah, but
Can I add one thing to that?
hold on 1 second, if I may, Reverend Green, because Reverend Payton and I accept your sentiment, and I stand in total agreement with you on this here issue. Be as it may, riddle me this: why is it then that the Democrats, the liberal left, are being so vocal about banning, about restrictions, well, not restrictions, but banning, and not really attacking the issue as you have just so wonderfully stated? Because if you leave it to the Democrats, it was the guns that did it. In fact, it was the gun that actually that was used in the commission of the crime, but it was a mentally ill person. And that is something that the Democrats are not willing to acknowledge.
Well, we know that politics and partisanship has played a significant role in impeding the progress of each of us. And unfortunately, this gun issue has not been one, in the words of Reverend Green, where the conversation has been common sense legislation. People have gone into their red or blue camps and have politicized the issue, which has caused a number of challenges that we currently have. I used to be a regional executive for an organization called the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, which is the third most powerful lobby organization in the country. And what I learned very well in the effectiveness of such an organization is that they're able to put the issue in terms of educational awareness around issues and strategies that support the public safety of all of us. And to the extent that we can begin to educate persons more about traumas and how each of us are impacted, it doesn't matter if you're Republican, it doesn't matter if you're Democrat, it doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, white or black. Every human being goes through life and experience traumas or stressors that impact us all in different ways. And so if we can do better jobs of understanding how stressed we are when we show up in public places, we can do well to keep ourselves safe and others safe in the process. So I think an educational awareness campaign is what's really needed in a bipartisan coalition. I'm not a Republican or a Democrat. I'm about what's in the best interest of the people. But unfortunately, many of our elected officials and leaders aren't taking those types of independent stances in this hyper partisan climate in which we live today.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree with you more, but right is right, and right has never wronged anybody. And when we look at the incident in which you were talking about in Uvalde, Texas, that was clearly a situation that could have been avoided if there were policies in place to protect our schools. Okay, the gun was not the problem. The gun will never be the problem, all right? Because guns are everywhere. In fact, I looked at a poll recently on Twitter and it said about 93.1% of Americans do believe that we should have guns. So I'm just hoping, and if I had to stand and answer this here question, I would be for restrictions and not banning. There's a difference, but I digress. You want to go ahead, Isaiah?
I said gun. Oh, I was going to say.
No, go ahead, Reverend Green.
Yeah, I was going to say guns are the problem in the hands of irresponsible people. It is the guns. And I agree everything, with the Reverend was saying. But the other thing, too, is all the philosophy and the psychology is great, but we have to put laws and put people in office in place that will put laws in place just like that. All those, the last shootings that we've had, mass shootings, they were all young and, between the ages of 18 and 24. Well, if you raise the age, that kid wouldn't have been able to get the gun to do that mass killing. Not that you can't stop 100% of it, but you would have stopped at least the last 3 or 4. Okay. If they could not have purchased that weapon, if there was a background check that would have showed that these kids had different things in their background that showed they had mental issues, as the Reverend says, all these things are accessible to us. It's just that nobody has the will to want to do anything about it. All they want to do is talk about it because there's money to be made. Anywhere there's power and money, there's complacency. And that's all that we're having, because this can be solved in 1 minute. We're the only country in the world that has this type of problem and this type of guns things. And we sit up here talking about it like we don't know what we're talking about. And we it's like the lunatics is running the asylum.
Right. And I like to retort that with one statement. Florida bill signed 2018 by Governor Rick Scott, Bill 7026. Okay, that was something that had encompassed all what you're talking about. All right, Isaiah, you got the next. Isaiah, it's on you. You want to go ahead and respond to that question, sir?
Yes. I have a very, unpopular opinion about assault weapons. To me, I don't think it's going to be as effective as people want it to be. Any ban or restriction, simply because there's many methods to getting weapons. They're everywhere. Criminals, most of the time, a criminal doesn't use a weapon that's registered to them. So when I see these mass shootings, to me, these are anomalies. These aren't even, this isn't something, statistically that's likely to happen to me or to my child. But, because I live in an area like Miami Gardens or Opalaka, it's more likely that a criminal with an illegal weapon is going to shoot at me or do something to me. You understand what I mean? So as far as my priorities concerning the assault ban and the restrictions, to me is that's something that's far out. That's an anomaly. I would love it if no kids are hurt in the future, if no one is shot up, but I don't think that's going to solve anything because, the thing that I'm afraid of isn't even these people, rather, my local crime, my local criminals who have illegal weapons that they've attained through different ways.
Okay. All right. Well, we got to move on. Let's just turn the tides, if we may, for this next question. In an article produced by CNBC, written by Brian Schwartz, titled Black Lives Matter Leaders Met with Biden Official, and they're disappointed with police reform talk. And in the article, he suggested the reason for the outrage is mainly over President Biden encouraging states to use surplus dollars, $350 million to be exact, from the stimulus funds in order to boost police departments. And suffice it to say, we are not a lawless society, as some would like to suggest. Here's what happens in an anarchy state. Anything goes. And the problem with that is mankind is inherently evil and needs boundaries to operate within. So let me just ask this next question, if I may. With all this talk around defunding police departments, due to recent abuse of power by a few officers, let's just point that out, what can be done to restore the public's trust, Chief Scott Israel?
Great question. I couldn't tell you how robustly I disagree with defunding the police. There was a Gallup poll about 8 or 9 months ago, and the only respondents to the poll were African American. And 88, and I could have predicted this response. From as a Fort Lauderdale police officer, the sheriff of Broward County, and now the proud chief of Opalaka, and having the pleasure of being able to work in many Black communities throughout my police career, I would have predicted this response. 88% of the folks said that they want more police. Minority communities are pro-law enforcement, not anti-law enforcement. They, like any other community, want police officers to treat people with dignity and respect, to abide by the laws, not to use excessive force, not to racial profile, which are the things that I want or any chief or sheriff would want. So defunding the police, if you want to take some money away from police budgets and put it towards mental health professionals who could ride with police officers and be able to deal with people who have some type of post-traumatic stress or are suffering from a mental illness, I'm all for that. But I think defunding the police would be catastrophic to our country. What we need to do are things like, no longer can we go to a community and say, you trust us, we'll trust you. It doesn't work that way. It shouldn't work that way. We as police, we have to earn the trust of the community. And how do we do that in Opalaka? How have I done that throughout my police career? By doing things like grocery giveaways, where I've partnered with Wayne Barton of Wayne Barton Christian Ministries, and we've delivered over 5 million pounds of food to communities that outdoor shopping markets, if you will. And when people get groceries and for free and they load up shopping carts, people will pray with you. Twice over my career, people I've met at grocery giveaways have called me up and told me about a crime that had occurred. So now we have witnesses to the crime or crimes that were about to occur. So you develop trust. You have that, as I spoke about before, that one team or one fight mentality. That's the only way. The community has got to partner with us. No community is going to be safe without the police, and no police officer is ever going to make an impact without the full support of the community. And I think that's That's the step, that's the direction we need to head.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we are out of time for this week's segment, Policing in Urban America. I want to thank my distinguished panel, which includes Chief of Police of Opelika Police Department, Scott Israel, Reverend Keon Payton, motivational speaker, Isaiah Wallace, and Reverend Andre Green. But please tune in next week for part 2. Again, like and share this video. Again, this is your Agent of Change signing off with this week's Crack the Mic. Peace.